I've been accused of wearing rose-colored glasses, so to speak, when it comes to the 90s. While the argument can be made that the early 90s was also a breeding ground of sorts for underground scenes and genre-bending aggressive music, nobody cared about anything but the grunge stuff, really. And what followed was some of the most blank and meaningless sounds to ever hit the landscape. Music that I call almost butt rock. Some of these bands got really big, but what I mean when I say flooded the landscape is that there was a surge of mediocre alternative bands in the late 90s. You know them. Or maybe you don't. I often wonder about a lot of these groups, and whatever happened to them. I remember long summers watching music videos non-stop, and in those days there was actually a few channels to choose from. You know, back in my day. But my favorite of the bunch was always Canada's Much Music, which was basically put on the air to promote these almost butt rock bands. It was on the 105th view that summer of Superman's Dead when I noticed that the kid in the video looked kind of familiar. The kid that played the little boy, and the little girl, was singer Ryan Dennis of Serial Joe. I had nothing to do that summer. So of course it didn't take long for me to put it together. Shortly after, with the help of a cousin, I was able to fully immerse myself in Serial Joe's music, and my 13-year-old brain felt at home, like Ryan Dennis was singing directly to me, because I had real problems and shit when I was 13. Looking back, I don't know what exactly it was I saw in these guys, and I figured they just kind of faded out somewhere along the line. Then, of course, upon some research, I found their story was pretty unique, and some of their music, it did kind of hold up, depending on if you're a dick or not. So kick back, spike up your hair, and subscribe to Staunch TV. All you gotta do is hit that subscribe button. Go ahead, do it right now, as we find out what the fuck happened to Serial Joe. Serial Joe was a Canadian band from Newmarket, Ontario, which consisted of high school students Ryan Dennis on vocals and guitar, Ryan Stever on lead guitar, John Davidson on the bass, and Dan Studnicki on drums. Dennis stated that the band's name came from a local girl with a speech disorder who had mispronounced the name Sergio as Serial Joe, although I've also read that one of their moms came up with the name. It was lead singer Ryan Dennis's mother who entered them into a local contest where the winner got some recording time, a contest that they won. And then the teens were able to take the tracks they perfected in the basement and record their first effort, Kicked, which all paid off, eventually winning them a Much Music Award for Best New Video. Much Music would be very kind to the band throughout the career, and the video itself is definitely a sign of the times. They were also the house band on YTV's System Crash, a Canadian sketch show for teens. The guys were hitting it pretty big and they were very young. Their cited influences were bands like Rage Against the Machine. Remember, this is 1998, and nu metal was hitting big time.
What you're gonna do, no way you're gonna go shut it off. Getting into the grind, putting metal to metal, the switch blowing a mind. Give us a push so we get right on the edge, not hopping downtown and keep getting on our legs.
Arguably, Serial Joe would reach the height of their success the next year, when they released their first studio album for Aquarius Records, Face Down, which peaked at number 47 on the Canadian Albums chart. The album's first single, Mistake, got some pretty decent airplay. And the song was also featured on a popular Much Music rock music compilation, Big Shiny Tunes 4. I actually remember having a copy of that. and they were featured in the made-for-TV movie Out of Sync. And they played Edgefest with some other notable bands, and would even play Woodstock 99 on the Emerging Artist stage. Some pretty big moves from some very young kids. Although the album itself was still pretty nu metal influenced, the track Mistake displayed the sound that would eventually be associated with the group, just a little further down the line. But regardless of one's musical taste, the album went gold in late 1999. That was quite a year for Serial Joe, and in their native Canada, they were pretty big stars. And with their next release, Serial Joe, they would get a bigger budget and overall production, re-recording their hit Mistake and remixing a few others. They even got the guy who was producing 9 Inch Nails at the time to work with them on the album, and got Todd McFarlane to do the cover. The album would put on display some harsher themes and deeper vocals, with the tracks What I See, Another Time, and one of my favorites, Silently Screaming. Finally the guys found their sound, even though the rap metal stuff was still popping up in this album a bit. But their overall sound was ripe for the adolescent masses devouring this stuff. Or, it would have been a few years earlier. It was all just too little too late at this point. Any bands in the genre were already either huge or non-existent, and the mediocre look of the band and their one-note videos, it just didn't help much. They kind of just blended in, which is the worst thing any band could have done in the late 90s. It was with their next effort, Last Chance at the Romance Dance, in 2000, where I felt they matured fully. And also where I felt they were a little too overproduced.
You sleep and you seem so content.
The band had always written their own songs for the most part, but here it seems someone was talking in their ear. The single Unintended was a power pop catchy little tune that actually seemed like it could have been a theme song for one of the reality shows that were taking over the music video channels that were once so kind to Serial Joe. But the single was largely ignored, as was the rest of the album. In my opinion, this one is just very boring, kind of making you wish that they would rap or something. And when all was said and done, the band was eventually dropped by their label in the early 2000s. This was the end for Serial Joe, but not for singer Ryan Dennis. He would start the band High Capital with bandmate Ryan Stever, a more hard-edged, melodic, heavier, Serial Joe kind of sounding group.
I go inside, where I'm alone, with all your naked faces, like I know that you deserve someone less than for respect, I can't read between.
Again, just very meh. Dennis was quoted at the start of his career as saying, "The only way I'd get tired of being in a band is if we toured too much and it got boring." Well, guess that happened. Not much is available on High Capital, but it didn't last long. Dennis went on to work with music as an electronic artist known as Platypus. Electronic music was always something he was interested in, but not having the time to do it, I suppose, is why he never did. While it's not my cup of tea, it's refreshing to hear, let me tell you. Ryan Dennis's first EP under the Platypus moniker, Soft Spoken Trees, was released by Toronto's Thoughtless Music in the summer of 2012. But now he puts music out under the M&R moniker, and all of his stuff can be found online. Dennis has spoken fondly about his time with the group and dealing with their early success, and it seems he's just happy to be making the music he wants to and living a quiet life. Drummer Daniel Akira Stednicki went on to get a PhD in music from the University of Alberta, where he teaches courses in both world and popular music studies. And guitarist Ryan Stever, who always had an interest in art, went on to become a professional photographer. And for those of us that remember them, it's not really their early rap rock stuff that made a mark. Rather, it's their later, more mature alternative sound and catchy hooks that bring back fond memories. And they definitely made their mark in their brief career. Let me know what you think in the comments. When it comes to Canadian bands I liked as a confused adolescent, because they were force-fed to me via non-stop late 90s music video blocks, I can go on and on. But I won't.